Hello guys, Michelle here and welcome back to my channel. In the last few weeks I've noticed a substantial amount of increased activity on the Te Araroa Facebook forums as people start to prepare for their upcoming through hikes of Te Araroa, COVID allowing. So in this video I wanted to cover off with you what seems to be one of the more popular topics at the moment, and that is exactly how do you navigate on the Te Araroa trail. Now before we go any further, don't forget before you leave today, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button if you liked this video and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to try and cover off all of the things that you need to know about navigating on Te Araroa, and that includes covering the different applications that I used on my smartphone when I was hiking the North Island section of Te Araroa. I'm going to cover other devices and things that you can use for navigation, including GPS devices and of course the all-important paper maps. And I am also going to be covering off the different trail markings that you are likely to find along the way so that you know what to expect. Let's start with what the Te Araroa Trust say should be your primary form of navigation on the trail, and that is with the paper maps and notes that they provide on their website. Now, any person who spends a substantial amount of time in the outdoors should probably at some point learn how to use a paper map. One of the things that is of course important for this purpose is to carry a compass with you, and this is a silver compass that I picked up before I started the Te Araroa trail just in case I needed to use it if I got lost for any reason while I was out there. Now this ended up being a pretty redundant purchase for me because not only do I not know how to use a compass outside of some very basic lessons that I took when I was a kid at high school, I also decided for weight consideration reasons that I didn't want to carry paper maps with me. Now, was this a good decision? Well, in hindsight, it didn't really affect me too much on the North Island. For the most part on the North Island, you are hiking through relatively well populated areas, and there are only very small sections where you can legitimately say that you are out of cell phone coverage and could potentially get into trouble if you lost the track for some reason. So if I was to hike the North Island again, I still probably wouldn't carry paper maps with me. But the reality is that if any one of my electronic devices had failed on me at any time whilst I was on the trail, I would have been in a pretty difficult position. And that's something that I potentially could have avoided if I'd known how to read and use a paper map. So if you are somebody who already knows how to use paper maps, then I would highly recommend that you carry them with you. You don't have to carry the whole bunch all at once, just print out the pages that you need and put them in a nice waterproof pouch so that you can carry those with you along the way. And if you don't know how to read a paper map and you've got enough time before you're planning on heading out on a long distance through hike, I would highly recommend that you take some lessons or a course and start to learn how to do that in the future. Now, as I mentioned a little while ago, the Te Araroa Trust has painstakingly put together a comprehensive set of trail notes and maps to go along with the Te Araroa Trail. And when I was preparing for my Te Araroa through hike last year, I printed off all of those maps and bound them into a lovely folder like this, which I called my Te Araroa Trail Notes. Inside this folder, which I'll show you in a little while, I split everything up into the different sections that are on the Te Araroa Trail. And this wonderful little folder that I prepared for myself was my primary resource for finding out things about the trail that I needed to know. It was also fantastic for doing things like planning my resupply strategy, and it also gave me a good overview of the trail without having to skim through all of the PDF copies on my computer, which I just don't like doing. So let's take a quick look inside that folder so I can show you what you can expect from those trail notes and maps. Okay, so here we are. This is what these trail notes look like printed up, and you can see we start off with different sections by section. So each section of the notes comes with this cover page that tells you what section you are looking to hike through. So in this particular case we have the Northland section, and it's nicely divided up into all the different maps with the numbers of the maps on each of these sections. So I would print out the cover page for each different section and put that at the front so I knew which section I was looking at. And then very first underneath that I would start to put the different trail notes. So this one here is a particularly good example of how the trail notes are set out. You have the section that you are walking at the top here, so in this case it is the first 4-day section to Ahipara from Cape Reinga. It tells you the different map numbers that you need to look at which cover this section. It tells you the northern start and the southern start, the distance, the rough time that it should take you to complete that section, and then also what kind of track it is. Usually you'll get a brief description of what you can expect from the track, and then it will also be divided up into different sections. So for example, I have the Cape Reinga section covered up here, and then I also have different information about accommodation along 90 Mile Beach, some different resources at Waipapa Kauri, which is a place just a little further down the beach, and then also Ahipara and where I can stay and resupply when I get to Ahipara. Now, the notes aren't set out in the best way possible. There are definitely improvements that could be made, but for the most part they are a great starting point for starting to prepare your journey. Now, immediately behind the trail notes for this particular section, I then put my trail maps for the section as well. So this is the starting map for the Cape Reinga section down to the first camp at Twilight Beach micro camp, and then I just flick through all of my maps for the Northland section. And the entire folder is set out in exactly this kind of fashion. Now, I'm not quite sure exactly where these trail maps come from. If you look down in the sources here, it does list the Department of Conservation and Land Information New Zealand as sources for these maps, but you will notice that they are not standard typical topographical maps for the trail. So this, for example, is one of the more dangerous and more awkward sections in the Richmond Ranges. This is the section which goes from over Little Rintle Mountain and then over Mount Rintle. And when you look at it on the trail map section here, it really doesn't look too bad at all. But contrast that with what you will see on a topographical map of the same area. A topographical map typically gives you a lot more detail. It tells you exactly the contours and the lay of the land, which is sort of emulated a little bit in the trail notes by using this shading on the map. But you can get a much better idea of exactly how close together those contour lines lie, as well as it shows you other tracks and things in the area and other good landmarks to look out for. So the trail maps prepared by the Te Araroa Trust are definitely a great place to start, but just as I wouldn't recommend solely relying on any electronic devices when you're on the trail, I also wouldn't recommend solely relying on your paper maps while you're on the trail either. Sometimes it is really good to have some other different things to back up what you're seeing on your trail maps, and that is why we are going to come straight into the different applications that I used on trail. So as most of you who have already watched my Te Araroa vlog series will know, and for those of you who haven't already watched it, I will link it for you up here. For the most part on the North Island, I was using my iPhone 6 Plus to navigate and obviously to communicate while I was out on the trail. Now, what did I use on my iPhone to keep myself aware of what was going on the trail? Well, there are two main apps that I want to cover off in this section. The first one is the official Te Araroa Trust app, and that is called the Trail app. Now, like any application, it does have its advantages and disadvantages. One of the biggest advantages that I found is that it carries with it electronic copies of all of those trail notes that I've just shown you that I printed out into that folder before I left. This means that you have easy access to those trail notes whenever you want to get access to them without having to access them through something like a Google Drive application or perhaps even Dropbox. It is easy and quick to get into those trail notes whilst you're actually out on the trail with the app. It's as easy as going into the app, tapping on the little sidebar there and just clicking on the Trail Notes button. From there you can easily see the different trail note sections from the North Island to the South Island, and you can tap on any section to bring up the trail notes for that section. So let's just take a quick overview of exactly what this app looks like. So to start with, the default settings are very handy. You'll see that if you go into your settings screen, you'll have kilometre points turned on, 10 kilometre points increases. It'll show you all the huts, the possible water sources, the campsites, and also holiday parks and hotels that are loaded into the app. This means that as you are using the application and you are trying to figure out things that are coming up in upcoming sections, you can easily count and see how many kilometres away they are. So you can see that on this zoomed out version, I am seeing kilometre increments of around 10 kilometres each. But if I zoom in a little bit further, I then can see each individual kilometre that is on the trail. Also, you'll see that if I zoom in a little bit further than that, it is showing me a little water droplet symbol every time that I am potentially going to cross a water source. And then also if I scroll a little bit further down towards Ahipara, you'll see that as we get closer to towns and things, it starts to tell me about the holiday parks and things that I'm going to find along the route. Now, as far as being able to see and assess the surrounding terrain that you're going to be going through, how does the TA Trail app perform in that particular circumstance? Well, let's take a look here at how the TA app looks through the Tongariro National Park region, where you'll know that there are quite a few mountains. So if we zoom in to the national park region, you'll see that even if I get in really close here, I'm just basically getting a Google Maps or similar view to what the surrounding terrain is. There's not an awful lot of detail between the kilometers, and it doesn't show me any topographical map relief lines. But don't despair, there is a way that you can start to see a little bit more detail on the TA Trail app, and that is by downloading your offline maps. So you can easily get to this by going into your menu on the left hand side of the app, scrolling down to offline maps, and that is going to tell you the different topographical maps that you can download for these sections. So we're going to scroll down, we're going to go to the section that we want to download it for. In this case it's Waikato King Country, and we're just going to tap on the download button there. Now, the thing about downloading the topographical maps is that you need to make sure you're connected to Wi-Fi or some kind of good cell phone service while you are downloading those maps. You will not be able to download them while you're out on the trail because a lot of these are very large files, and in my experience they can take quite a while to download. However, once you have the map downloaded onto your phone in the TA Trail app, you can access it as an offline map. For example, I have now downloaded the Northland section of the topographical maps, as you can see here. So let me show you exactly how you can get these to show up in your trail app. First of all, you're going to have to go back to the main screen and then tap on this little button in the top right hand corner that shows a map. In there it's going to tell you the different map types that you have available, and I'm going to click on NZ Topo. In this case I'm going to click on the top one because that is going to give me the topographical maps regardless of whether I am online or offline at the time. Because I've downloaded these maps onto my phone, I should be able to access them while I'm offline, and you can see it's now changed the maps for this particular region into those topographical maps. And if I zoom all the way in, I'm going to start to see some of the different relief features that you are used to seeing on a topographical map app. So as well as marking off different accommodations along the way and places where it is a possible water source, the map also shows you things like campsites. So for example, in this Porongia section, you can see these little brown markers on the map are actually for campsites, and if you tap on one, it will tell you exactly where it is, what things are allowed there, whether you can freedom camp, whether there is a cost to camp there or not, and then it tells you the name of that campsite. And it will also mark off where the huts are. In this case I've got to zoom in particularly far, but there's a little green icon there that tells you that the Pohotia hut is sitting there, and again it gives you all the information you need, including the dock fees per night for that hut. Now, I haven't gone so far as to verify that every single one of those different places marked on the Te Araroa Trail app are accurate in the fees that they are telling you and the information that is provided. You have to bear in mind that this is a very new app and it is still under development, and so there are some bugs and things that they need to work out. But for the most part, it is very usable. But having said all of that, I did have some major issues with the Te Araroa Trail app while I was out on the trail, which eventually led to me not using it any longer. I have to give a little bit of a disclaimer here because I'm not sure how many of those issues are due to the fact that I was running the Te Araroa Trail app on my iPhone. I have noticed from being around other hikers that use other kinds of phones that my version of the Te Araroa Trail app on iOS was a lot more buggy, a lot less easy to use, didn't have all of the same features as the app did on Android phones. As far as my usage of the app, the time when I started to experience the biggest issues with this was when I was hiking through Auckland. That's when I really started to notice that the app just wasn't detailed enough for what I needed to be able to navigate on the trail. I'll show you a little bit of what I mean here. So for example, if we look at Auckland on the just plain old Google Maps, if we zoom in, you'll see that we get a little bit of detail, but not a whole heap, but you'll see that where the trail route actually goes doesn't necessarily correspond to a pathway or something that is easily identifiable. So I found that through Auckland in particular, I was getting lost on a regular basis. And okay, even if I could have navigated myself around and gotten myself into roughly the right area, by this point in my hike, I really wanted to make sure that I was hiking every single available kilometre of the Te Araroa route. Now this doesn't get any better if I turn on my topo maps, and I'll show you why here. Because when I turn on my topo maps and zoom in to this kind of level, if I am offline or even if I'm online sometimes, you'll see that all of the information on the map disappears and I get these little grey squares. Now you might not think that this is such a big issue. I mean, after all, how I'm zoomed in at the moment, I can't even see the next kilometre marker. In fact, I've got to zoom out quite a bit before I can see it. But especially when you are hiking through areas like Auckland, or even if you're on a tricky piece of trail through a wilderness section, for example, and you need to know all the different twists and turns, or you need to figure out what rivers are coming up, and you just need to get in to that larger detail at some point, it's almost impossible to do if you are using the TA app alone. And eventually, by the time that I reached Te Kuiti, I was getting so frustrated with this that I decided that I needed to bite the bullet and purchase a different application instead. The application that I chose to switch to in Te Kuiti was the Guthook app. Now, I'd say with relative confidence that this is probably the application of choice among the thru-hiking community. Guthook has been around for a little while and it's probably most popularly used on the American long distance trails. So why would you decide to switch to the Guthook app, especially when the Te Araroa Trail official app is completely free and the Guthook app is going to set you back around about in the region of $50 for the entire TA trail route? Well, quite simply, it's because Guthook is everything that you need to be able to navigate and get information on the trail. With the exception of the trail notes, Guthook contains everything that the Te Araroa Trail app can give you and more. So let's take a quick look at some of the best features of Guthook. So one thing that I didn't mention with the Te Araroa Trail app is that you can pinpoint your location on the trail just by hitting this button in the bottom right hand corner. That is going to take you to where you are. And similarly, Guthook has exactly the same feature you can access just by hitting the GPS button on the bottom right hand corner of the phone app and then hitting the little target button to find yourself and your location. If you don't want to use up excess battery power, Guthook actually allows you to turn off your GPS when you don't need to locate yourself. So let's just take a quick look at the settings in the Guthook app. So if we go down into our menu, we can go straight into our settings. And you can see here in the settings that we can actually select the Lin's Topo 50 maps as our offline maps, which means that we can get a nice detailed picture, as is shown here on the screen, of the Te Araroa Trail route. And you can see in this example in particular that as long as we are sticking to the trail, we are always going to have topographical maps, but if we're ever to veer off the trail for any reason, then we are going to get into areas where those topographical maps are not covered. One of the great features that I really loved about Guthook was the elevation feature, and I just found it incredibly easy to use and very easy to read. You can zoom in and out to the section that you are planning to walk on the next day. It tells you exactly where all the main landmarks and things are along that elevation route, which is very handy, and it's just a great way to plan for upcoming sections. Now the TA app does also have a similar elevation feature, but it is a little bit more clunky to use. I found the best way to do it was to zoom right into the section that you're planning on hiking, tap somewhere on that blue line, and that will bring up your elevation profile in that section. Now this particular elevation profile, it does sort of serve a purpose. You can use the scroll bar at the bottom if you can ever get your finger right on the button, which I often struggle with, to scroll along the different elevation profiles of the sections that are coming up. And if you get to a particular section you want to take a bit more of a detailed look at, you can just zoom in on that elevation section too. But you'll see that none of the other features are marked on this elevation profile, so it can be a little bit difficult to know exactly where, say for example, that hut that you need to get to is located. Okay, back to Guthook. So it still has all of those features that we have on the TA Trail app, but I actually find that it has more often than not more features than you would find in the TA app. So for example, if we zoom into Taumaranui here, you'll see that there is a lot of information here about different campsites and holiday parks and other places of interest around and about that you would need to know about, and specifically it has got marked the Taumaranui canoe hire place where you will need to stop on your way out if you are wanting to hire a canoe for the Wanganui River journey. Now, whereas each individual kilometre is not marked on the Guthook app, you can tap anywhere along this red line and find out what kilometre it is on that year's route. Now, I have seen some other apps and the way they work, and it is not as easy to calculate the distance between 2 points on Guthook, but as I mentioned, you can just tap any point, and if you make a mental note of the 2 kilometres that you need to get to, it's easy to just work out that calculation in your head. Now, as I mentioned before, you can also turn on these topographical maps with Guthook, and if we look at that exact same section we were looking at in the Te Araroa Trail app a little bit earlier, you'll see that I can zoom in pretty close. In fact, I'm almost all the way in here on the Tongariro crossing section of the trail, and I'm still getting those wonderful, beautiful relief marks there. It's telling me where all my lovely viewpoints are if I want to take some fantastic photos of the Emerald Lakes. It's also telling me where different trail junctions are, so I know where I need to pay attention and make sure that I am staying on the track, as well as the different water sources and things along the way. Although just bear in mind, you shouldn't be collecting water on the Tongariro crossing. Toilet locations are also really handily marked on Guthook. Now, the place where Guthook really became worth its weight in gold to me was in the feature that it provides, which allows hikers to leave comments at different landmarks along the way. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I downloaded Guthook for the first time in Te Kuiti, and the very next section after that was probably one of my worst days on the entire trail when I had to hike along the Mango-Okewa Reserve track. Now, if you take a look at that particular section on Guthook, you can see that we have Te Kuiti here, and we follow the Mango-Okewa stream track until we hit the reserve track, and then we're hiking all the way through the reserve to this little campsite that I was looking for here. So I had an awful day hiking through the Mango-Okewa North Reserve track, and then I got to this particular point of the trail here where you can see this junction is marked. Now, this is where the trail turned from a farm track into a dirt road. Now, I was obviously at a pretty bad mental state in the trail by this point because I did not check the comments for the junction to this shelter, and if you scroll back here you can see that it says quite clearly there is no campsite south of here on the same road like Guthook says. So Guthook isn't the be all and end all, and you should make sure that you are checking the comments on all of those landmarks and markers just to make sure that the place that you are heading to is definitely there to start with, and that it also has things like water if it's something that you need to make sure that you've got at that location. Once I started to use Guthook, there was really no going back, and I will continue to use that when I hike through the South Island next year. The last piece of electronic equipment that I used while I was out on the trail was the Garmin GPS Map 66i. The main reason why I purchased this particular model was because I wanted something that had an emergency feature, and this includes an SOS button, and I also wanted something that I could communicate with my parents with if I needed to for any reason. I could load in GPX files of the trail onto this device and also use this as a navigation device too. One of the best things that I liked about this was that it had an ability to live track my location, so it would send different waypoints and things at certain intervals as I was hiking throughout the day to mark me on a map that I could then share a link with to my family, and at any time they could see where I was on the trail. Now, there's absolutely no doubt that that is a lot of money to spend, especially if this is your very first through hike and you're not planning on doing anything like this again in the future. But I have to say, I am incredibly glad that I've got it now. I can see that this is going to be a very useful tool for me in the future, and I'm excited to learn more about its features and start using it properly when I'm out on the trail. Now, I can totally understand that not everybody out there is going to want to drop $1,000 or more on a specific GPS device like the Garmin that I have just showed you. But don't worry, that doesn't mean that you can't get the benefit of using a specific GPS app or something similar on your phone. For example, I know that there are apps out there like Map Toaster and iHike GPS where you can download specific GPX files directly into those apps and get basically the same benefits that I am getting from the navigation features on the Garmin. All of the Te Araroa maps are available for download from the Te Araroa Trust website in GPX format, which makes it really easy to get them showing up on your phone through those third-party apps. Now, not all of them are going to be free apps to download, but in general they are going to be a lot cheaper than probably even Guthook is. And as long as you have a reliable phone with a decent battery capacity, that could be a really great alternative to buying a specialized GPS device. So that's all I really wanted to say on the electronic side of this video, but I will leave you with this final thought, and that is, regardless of what option you decide to use, whether it's paper maps or an app on your phone or perhaps even a specialized GPS device, make sure that you have at least one backup to that. There's nothing like getting caught out in the harsh New Zealand backcountry environment because there's been a freak snowstorm in the middle of summer and all of a sudden you're stuck inside a hut for an extra 2 or 3 days than you were planning, running out of battery on all of your devices and not having any other method of navigating yourself out of that situation. So at the very least, if you are planning on carrying an electronic device, make sure that you are carrying some sort of emergency power bank with you that has a little bit of juice left in it to get you out of a situation in case you get stuck. And as I mentioned in the start of this video, your best backup option is always going to be a paper map and a compass. Alright guys, we're nearly at the end of this video, and the very final thing that I wanted to cover off is the kind of trail markings that you can expect to find whilst you're out on the Te Araroa Trail. So in New Zealand with the Te Araroa Trail, each different section is managed by the different local and regional councils. This means that the way that the trail is marked through the different regions can differ greatly. So for example, in some regions you might be finding that you've got a lot of trail markers all over the place and that they're at every single junction that you need to take, and in another region you might find that they are very sparsely marked. Sometimes there are lots of trail markers and sometimes you just don't have anything at all. Also, you need to bear in mind that due to the nature of the trail, a lot of it passes through private land, and so any markings on and across that land are completely at the discretion of the landowner. In general though, there are 2 or 3 different kinds of markers that you will find while you are hiking. First and foremost, probably the most prominent of all the trail markings that you will see across the entire length of the trail is the little black triangle, which is often accompanied by the Te Araroa Trust Trail logo. Now this is more prominently found in residential areas or areas that are connecting between different wilderness areas or Department of Conservation tracks or other backcountry tracks. They're usually relatively easy to spot, although they can be quite small, so it's a good idea to keep an eye on your maps for any junctions that are coming up so that you can be on the lookout for those signs as you approach them. Through the wilderness areas, there are generally 2 different types of markers that you are going to be looking for. The first, of course, is that beautiful thing that we know here in the New Zealand backcountry, and that is the bright orange triangle. These will generally be placed at regular intervals depending on the kind of terrain. The idea is that you should be able to walk from one of these to the next one relatively easily without getting lost in between the 2. And they kind of operate the same way as the white blazes, for example, on the Appalachian Trail work. And finally, if you're hiking through an area where you are spending a considerable amount of time above the bushline, you are likely to be following what is known in New Zealand as a poled route. This is exactly what it sounds like. Usually it is some kind of pole stuck into the scree. Most occasions it will have some kind of reflective orange triangle stuck onto the top of it as well, and in the absence of poles it might be a route that is marked by cairns. Regardless of what kind of route you are following, it's still so important to make sure that you're paying attention and that you are checking your maps regularly. I can't count the number of times that I ended up walking a kilometre or 2 off in the wrong direction just because a marker had been obscured by, say, long grass, or perhaps it was just placed in a really inconvenient spot so that it wasn't completely visible from the trail. These are things that are probably going to improve over time as the trail gets a little bit older, but it is something that you're going to have to deal with now. And for the most part, it's actually something that makes the trail a little bit more of an adventure. It means that you get to upskill yourself in following yourself on a map and hopefully get a few more map reading skills underneath your belt. Okay guys, that is all I have for you in this week's video. If you're still here and watching, then congratulations, because this one has been a long one, but I hope that it has given you some really helpful information about the different kind of navigation options you have on Te Araroa. If there's any more specific detail that you would like to know about any of these particular navigation options, please go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I will get back to you as soon as I can. If not, if you like this video, don't forget to go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and ding that notification bell. Next week, I'm going to be covering 10 things you need to know before you start hiking Te Araroa, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Until then guys, stay safe and take care out there.